Mr. Thompson is the executive director of ASEPA, and he's the one who is leading the charge as a public accountability organization. He's leading the charge and asking that the Attorney General answer some questions on this, or at least the law is tweaked on that. He's joined us on the line. Mr. Thompson, you're welcome to Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Maru. Many thanks for having me.
Okay, so just to be clear, the fact that you are suing the AG does not mean you are suing the AG as a person. You are using that to sue the state so that some corrections can be done. Is that the understanding I should get from you?
Indeed.
Okay, so explain further what your difficulty with the asset declaration law is.
Well, what we've basically done is to invoke the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, subject to constitutional interpretation, to set clarity on our current asset declaration law. If you read the Constitution of the Republic 1992, Article 286 is very clear on asset declaration. It says public office holders must declare their assets and liabilities before taking office as public office holders. That's Article 286. It's very clear. Now, we all know that Parliament also sometimes, when the Constitution set a provision, Parliament will enact laws to further guide, the operation of those provisions. And so the law that Parliament made, on asset declaration is called Public Office Holders Declaration of Assets and Disqualification Act 550, which was passed in 1998. And the provision of Act 550 created a 6-month window for public office holders, saying that they can declare their assets and liabilities, and those declarations must be filed within 6 months upon coming into office, or 6 months after coming into office. That is where the difficulty is, because the Constitution says you must declare your assets and liabilities before coming into office as a public office holder, mandated under Article 286 Clause 5 to declare your assets and liabilities. Then Act 550 is saying that, within 6 months after coming into office, you can file your declaration. That is where we believe the inconsistency arises. And to the extent that the Act 550 is at par or contravenes the explicit provisions of Article 286, what we are praying the Supreme Court to do is to bring clarity to this matter and enforce the supremacy of the constitutional provisions under Article 286.
So in practical terms, what do you want to see happening henceforth if the law is tweaked to the in the way that you are requesting it be tweaked?
So first off, we want the Supreme Court to further enforce that public office holders must declare their assets and liabilities before coming into office, as enshrined in Article 286. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to the declaration itself, the problem is that we've had a number of cases that we have taken to charge that the public office holders declare their assets and liabilities way after the 6 months period, but in essence, when they were doing the declaration, they filed their declaration, that is their status, their asset and liability position at the time of declaration. Meanwhile, the law says your status, your liabilities and asset position before taking office. So there are two things here: the period of the declaration and also the declaration itself. Because now, what Act 550 is saying is that you can declare within 6 months. We know 6 months is a long time in the life of a public office holder to gather enough assets or reduce their liabilities. We know it's a long time for a lot to happen within 6 months, especially looking at what is going on currently in our governance dispensation. It's a long time. Now, assuming a public office holder have occupied an office for 5 months, and the person is now going to file their declaration, they now go and file a declaration on their current status at the time of the declaration. But what the law seeks to enforce is what was your asset position before taking office? Because that is what the entire asset declaration mechanism is. It's a public accountability mechanism to check what people have before they come into office and what they're able to gather when they come in. And so once that confusion sets in, it's very difficult to track and ensure that the accountability mechanism which the law is supposed to provide is working. And so we want the Supreme Court to also make a declaration on that as well. And then among other things, we want the Supreme Court to also now order all public office holders who file their declarations pursuant to the defective law in ASEPA 50 to go back and file their assets and liabilities declarations as at the time they were taking or before they took office. What were the assets they have? What did they have? And not at the period when they were declaring, but what did you have when before you were coming to occupy that position? Not what you have after coming into the office and within 6 months you were declaring what you had. And so we want that clarity, and we build that to further strengthen the asset declaration regime that we have. Even though Parliament is currently working on a public office holders bill, we think that this clarity by the Supreme Court will be a very good thing for our public accountability.
It's good you mentioned Parliament, because that's what I was going to go to. Why don't you go to your MP and ask them to bring a private member's bill to make those demands become law, rather than going to bother the Supreme Court?
So there are two things here. The Constitution, the supremacy of the Constitution must be enforced, and the Constitution has said that any time you feel that any law made by Parliament or anybody is found to be inconsistent with any provision of the Constitution, you must go to the Supreme Court and ask the Supreme Court to set clarity on that. So that's one mechanism. Two, we also know that Parliament is currently working on the Code of Conduct for Public Office Holders Bill. And I've had the privilege to review some of the bills, and we believe that the problem which we've taken to court now is still in there. The law that Parliament is making now on asset declaration is still weak. And Omaru, you know why it's weak? It's weak because the people who this law is supposed to provide check and balance mechanisms, are basically the same people making the law. And they know how to make the law to ensure that the law would not work. And so if we have an avenue like this, where we can use to set clarity and say, look, the Constitution is the benchmark. Once the Constitution says declare before you come into office, that must be done. And then all the laws that are further going to be made by a Parliament or by anybody else will conform to the provisions of the Constitution. So that is what we are seeking from the Supreme Court.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Mensah Thompson. He's Executive Director of the Alliance for Social Equity and Public Accountability, also known as ASEPA.